My name is CMG, and I am proud to be back on YouTube.com reviewing bad TV. Yo, who the fuck is MattCMG? Hey everyone, it's me, MattCMG, and as you all know, we talk about Nickelodeon shows a lot on this channel. In the past year or so, I've made videos on almost every one of Nick's big sitcoms of the late 2000s, early 2010s, from how much I love Drake and Josh, to how iCarly predicted modern internet culture, to how all of these shows are connected, and I even wrote a finale for Victorious. I will likely talk about these shows again in the future in some capacity, but there's one show from this bunch that I rarely mention, and when I do mention it, it's usually a joke at its expense, and that show is none other than 2014's Sam and Cat. People seem to be extremely mixed on this show, with people who grew up with it really loving it and claiming it was the last good Nick-com, while others think that it's completely terrible. As somebody who hadn't seen it until recently as in like a year ago, I'm somewhere in the middle. The show did a lot right, but it wasn't of the same caliber of those that came before it, and today I'll be explaining why. Don't think of this video as a review because I'm not a reviewer, I don't see myself as a critic or anything like that, but rather take this as a look at how spin-offs in general often fail when compared to their originals. So smash that like button, let's get weird, let's get wild, and let's get right into how Sam and Cat isn't great, isn't terrible, but it's just fine. So in case you're unfamiliar with this show, Sam and Cat is a crossover spin-off of both iCarly and Victorious. Sam Puckett from iCarly moves to LA and becomes roommates with Cat Valentine from Victorious. The two start a babysitting service to make money, and hijinks ensue. Sam's brash nature conflicts with Cat's naive kindness to give them this odd couple dynamic.
We sort of have this whole fun odd couple dynamic. Built-in conflict.
And for the most part, it works. These two characters are an interesting pairing, and that's likely why it was them that got the spin-off and not any other character from either of these shows. They're also the most popular characters from their respective shows, so there's probably also that. Their characters are pretty consistent from where they left off in their own shows, with a few changes made to make it work better. For instance, Sam is still Sam, she's still this hard exterior, soft interior type of character, but she's a lot more mature due to going from supporting to main character. Cat is pretty similar, where as a supporting character she was extremely ditzy and her intelligence varied depending on what the plot needed, but as a main character, she's a lot more competent while still serving as a good foil for Sam.
Poggers!
This on its own is fine. The main dynamic of the show works, and it serves as a good basis for a lot of the episodes. As the show goes on, you slowly see Sam and Cat get more used to each other. Their friendship grows gradually, and they start to truly care for each other as best friends. This is one of the strongest aspects of the show, and I'll get into it a little bit later in the video. It's basically just female Drake and Josh, but less funny. Aside from Sam and Cat themselves, the show has three main side characters. Nona, Cat's grandmother who constantly reminisces about the olden days, Dice, Cat's hustling neighbor who also happens to be a 12-year-old, and Goomer, an MMA fighter who is dumber than a sack of bricks. Personally, I think Nona is the least interesting of these characters. She's not around much, but when she is, it's usually only for one joke. That joke being she's old and hasn't adapted to the modern age yet. With the show's whole aesthetic being based around phones and youth culture, you do kind of need that grounded old-fashioned character to balance out the cast, but it's honestly not really needed here. Like I said, the show's aesthetic is based around phones and stuff, but it's just that, an aesthetic. It doesn't really affect the plot of most episodes. The character had potential, they could have easily done something with her, but at the end of the day they only bring her around for a cheap joke every once in a while. Of the three side characters, I think Dice is the most interesting, because his connections and money-making schemes tend to get the group into a lot of situations, and comedy-wise he is often the butt of the joke. Like there's an episode where the dude just wants a drink, and for literally no reason everybody tells him no.
Adrian, Michael?
Really did my guy fucking dirty here. He comes across as a genuinely good kid who just gets caught up in crazy situations as honest mistakes. He's oftentimes just trying to make money in some albeit not very honest ways, but he's never made out to be malicious, and when he does make a mistake, he seems to feel genuinely bad about it. I think he's a good example of that typical young but acts more adult than the actual adults trope done well. Most characters that follow this trope are often void of consequences, think Megan from Drake and Josh, but Dice messes up constantly. His deals tend to go bad and he ends up losing more money than he makes, which adds realism to his character while also serving as good comedy. Dice is also Goomer's manager, and they end up developing this almost father-son relationship, and not in the way that you'd think. Since they kind of smartened Cat up for this show, they needed a new, impossibly dumb character, and Goomer fits that role. He's your typical gentle giant type character, you know, he's this big hulking dude with a soft spot for his friends. He'll do anything for Sam, Cat, and Dice. He's like their cool uncle if you think about it. But his ignorance leads those kind gestures to come off as kind of bizarre. Like I said, he's he's the other impossibly dumb character. When Kat's not around and they need a foil for Sam or Dice, Goomer is usually right there to misunderstand basic things. He's dumb, but not in the same way that Kat is, if that makes sense. He has funny moments, but they're often bogged down by this patronizing voice that he does. He talks really slow and with a lot of emphasis so that the audience knows that he's dumb. And it feels like it's just talking down to the audience, like we're too dumb to figure out that he's the dumb guy. The character does have genuine moments, but I think they would have been more impactful if the actor wasn't doing that voice. Overall, the cast is fine and their dynamic is pretty funny. They're an oddball group of friends, 2 teenage girls, a 12-year-old boy, and a 30-something grown man, but at no point does the group ever feel forced to be together. Goomer being the oldest, you'd kind of expect him to be like the leader of the group, or with Dice being the youngest, you'd think the girls would see him as like a younger brother, but all 4 of them treat each other as equals. There is no real leader of the group like the other shows had. I guess Sam is technically the de facto leader, but she hardly ever takes that leadership role. She's very go with the flow, usually going along with whatever Kat or Dice are doing. Ultimately, I really liked this dynamic. It may seem redundant in some ways, but it lends itself to some good banter comedy, and it feels like a real friendship. The comedy in the show works, it's funny and all, but it doesn't really do anything new or revolutionary. Typical odd couple dynamic with our 2 leads, pretty basic sitcom writing, and the typical random comedy you'd expect of a show like this. If you thought iCarly or Victorious were funny, then you'll probably find Sam and Kat funny. If you ask me though, the comedy is noticeably more childish than in the previous shows, and I think I know why. Many of the previous shows had casts that grew up with their audiences. For instance, the reason iCarly was so successful was because the cast aged by a similar amount as the audience did. They start as young high school students and over the course of the show grow up and are high school seniors by the end, reflecting their target audience's age, which was likely pretty close to that. Sam and Kat didn't really have this because they were already basically adults when it began. Like, it became pretty obvious that these were grown adults playing teenagers, so my theory is that to circumvent this, they added in the babysitting service to inject children into the show. This would appeal to kids of a wider age range, but as a result they had to dumb down the comedy a little bit, and you can kinda tell. It doesn't make it bad, and it's definitely not unfunny, but it's not exactly stimulating comedy. Though I will say there are some jokes that are pretty big-brained, a few meta jokes that likely went over kids' heads, and there was even an episode where they straight up joke about terrorism and 9/11. I'm glad I'm not joking.
I've got the timers for the bombs! He said he's got the timers for the bombs! Code blue, code blue! Code blue, code blue. Code blue. Code blue.
What's going on?
Get him!
However, what it occasionally lacks in comedy, the show makes up for with its heartfelt moments. Throughout the show, we see how Sam and Kat slowly grow closer as friends, and it's honestly kinda wholesome. The 2 first meet by sheer coincidence, but as they start living together, we see how they get more comfortable with each other and how they change each other for the better. For example, in the first episode, Sam confesses to Kat how lost she feels without Carly in her life anymore, and Kat consoles her and tells her, in her own Kat kind of way, that she can decide her own path. And that Sam most certainly does, as from that point forward, she takes a lot more direct action than she did before. On the other hand, through her interactions with Sam, Kat learns to stop being so worried about everything and to take more risks, even if those risks get her caught up in some odd situations. Unfortunately, the show was cancelled before they had a chance to end it on their own terms, and it never got a proper finale, but if I had to choose an episode to serve as the finale, I would choose either The Killer Tuna Jump or Yay Day, and both of these episodes work as finales because they put Sam and Kat's friendship to the test to the highest degree, and they end up as better friends because of it. The Killer Tuna Jump is a 1-hour special with a lot of fan service, while Yay Day is a much more simple episode, but has a really great final scene that would honestly hit different if it was the last thing you'd see of the show. If you're gonna watch this show, I'd recommend watching either of these episodes last. They just kinda hit different. My problems begin when you realize that the show rarely takes advantage of the fact that it's a spin-off, and therefore makes the plot of most episodes not as interesting as they could be. Many episodes revolve around the fact that Sam and Kat run a babysitting service out of their apartment, so they're usually out doing wacky stuff with the kids, which in and of itself is a fine premise for the show. But when you realize that both of our main characters come from shows with significantly more interesting premises, popular web show and performing arts school, it starts to feel like a step down. Like, there are plenty of episodes where the girls get into wacky situations because they're trying to do a specific thing for a kid that they're babysitting, and those episodes can be great, but the best episodes of the show tend to be the ones where the girls' pasts come into play. Episodes like Super Psycho and The Killer Tuna Jump work because they utilize the events and characters of the previous shows, and it's cool to see those old characters interact with the new ones. Even without old characters returning, there are still many opportunities for the characters to utilize their experiences and skill sets from their previous adventures. There should have been way more episodes where Kat uses her talents from Hollywood Arts, or where Sam uses her fame from iCarly to get them into or out of situations. For example, there's an episode where Sam is slated to fight an MMA fighter, and it's all over the news, yet nobody seems to even know who Sam is, despite iCarly being so popular in their universe. Kat doesn't have this problem to the same degree, as they utilize her past and talents a lot more, but in some pretty indirect ways. There are episodes where this is done well, such as the episode Mama Goomer, where they use Psychowitz's classroom as a main plot point, but instances like these are pretty far and few between. We do see Sam use the iconic butter sock, though. So that's a plus. One thing that isn't a plus, however, is that this show seems to decanonize the I Party with Victorious crossover, something that a lot of fans really like. In the first episode of Sam and Kat, the two don't acknowledge that they've met before. Kat recognizes Sam from the iCarly web show, but Sam has no recollection of Kat, and neither of them mention the Kenan Thompson party. But okay, maybe it's just because they never actually interacted during the party. That could be fair. Except they basically do meet. They sing together at the end of the episode. Sam even looks Jade straight in the eye, and then they don't recognize each other when they meet again in Killer Tuna Jump. Maybe that's just Sam not caring, but that doesn't seem to be a moment one would forget. On the other hand, it's also possible that Sam and Kat is the one that isn't canon, as Kat appears on iCarly, albeit in the online-only segments that never aired on the show. So if those are canon, then the spin-off isn't. The online-only segments are actually really inconsistent, because sometimes it'll be Kat, and other times it'll be Ariana Grande, so these things probably aren't canon in any way. But then again, this is the Schniederverse, a bunch of shows that are notorious for not connecting properly, so whatever. The show seems to be aware of its spin-off status to some degree, since there's an episode with cameos from Penny Marshall and Cindy Williams, who starred in an old show called Laverne and Shirley, which was a spin-off of Happy Days, and I wouldn't be surprised if Sam and Kat was partially based on this. They break the fourth wall like this a few times throughout the show, and while it can be funny, it feels like it happens way too often. Don't get me wrong, I like a good fourth wall break or a meta joke every now and then, but there are far too many jokes about bad sitcom dialogue or other jokes that are basically just the writers being self-deprecating. The show does have a few meta callbacks, like this joke in the second episode.
Why? That show's a big hit! What kind of TV network cancels a big hit?
It's insane. They're not even gonna do a big final episode.
What?
This joke is referencing how Victorious was canceled, but it's only funny if you know the meta stuff, which most people, I assume, don't. The blooper episode is extremely meta, and they even seem to acknowledge that everyone romanticizes Drake and Josh, or that Sam and Kat is basically just a female version of it.
Just some really fun to watch clips that showcase the magic that is Sam and Kat.
And one blooper from Drake and Josh.
It's all of these fourth wall breaks and references that make the show feel like it's trying way too hard to be this pseudo-parody of spin-offs in general, which it definitely had the potential to be, but in doing that, it struggled to be its own show. That's not to say that the show is completely dependent on its spin-off status, because there do need to be episodes where the show can carry itself and stand on its own, and those episodes do exist. I just think that it was wasted potential that there weren't more of them. The lack of meaningful callbacks to the character's past that I mentioned earlier adds to this. It had potential to be something really great with all the meta commentary that it attempts to do, and I bet that if the show went on for longer than it did, we probably would have seen that potential reached. Ultimately, a lot of the show just feels like wasted potential. Even something as simple as the opening sequence just feels uninspired. It's just a slideshow of behind-the-scenes photos with the occasional clip from the show thrown in there, all through the lens of a Pearphone. It's not bad, but it just feels lazy, and not really a good depiction of what the show actually is. For comparison, iCarly's intro is formatted like you're surfing YouTube and editing a video, which fits perfectly with how the internet is so important to the premise of the show. Or take the Victorious intro. It's edited like a music video, and that's partially because it was, but that perfectly embodies how important music and the performing arts are to the show. What does Sam and Kat's intro show us? Well, it shows us that they're friends and that they have Pearphones. Doesn't really tell us a whole lot about what the show actually is about. The theme song itself, Just Fine, is a banger, but that too is missed potential. The song is performed by Backhouse Mike, aka Michael Corcoran, who wrote a lot of the music from a lot of the other Dan Schneider shows, and he does a great job here, but it feels weird having a Schneider show where the main character doesn't sing the intro, as that has historically been the case. The main leads all sang the intros to their respective shows, so why wasn't it done here? Ariana Grande and Jenette McCurdy can both sing, so why not have either of them or even both of them sing the opening? I know that is such a minor complaint, like, oh, the intro's different, but it's little stuff like that that shows how much potential the show had. Like, for example, imagine if Just Fine was a duet with Ari and Jenette. That alone would help the intro be more representative of what the show is actually about, since it would show the friendship between the two main characters. It's such a small change, but it would make such a big difference, at least in my opinion. The whole show is like this, where there are so many small changes that they could have made that would have improved the show, even if by a little bit. to help it reach the potential that it definitely had. At the end of the day, I'm really torn on this show. There is so much that it does right and so much that I like about it, but at the same time it never really pushes the bar and has so much missed potential that it holds itself back from being great. It's very aware that it's a spin-off, and it occasionally attempts to use its spin-off status to its advantage, but rarely does so in any meaningful way. It seemed like it maybe wanted to be a parody of spin-offs that don't quite capture the magic of the original, but ended up being just yet another spin-off. I don't hate the show or anything, I just wish it gave me more of a reason to like it. I'm just so conflicted about a show made for 12-year-old girls. But I do like the show, and I do think that it's worth something, even if only on a surface level, and I'll explain why. Sitcoms are like comfort food TV. They're not always enriching, there's always something better you can be consuming, and their impact can be unfulfilling. But at the same time, there's just something so fun and wholesome about them. They're like palate cleansers in a weird way, right? You know, I like me a nice filet mignon every once in a while, but at the same time, I could always go for a slice of some shitty frozen pizza. I like shows like Breaking Bad, The Boys, Evangelion, all kinds of shit. Shows that can get really dark and show us the deepest problems within society and human nature. Some real deep shit. But every now and again, I need me a sitcom. Something that doesn't take itself too seriously, where the characters always have their problems solved in 22 minutes. Shows like this have a weird way of making you feel like you're right there with the characters, that you're part of the gang. And if you're ever feeling down or lonely, you might just need that brief half hour where you feel like you have a friend. As torn on this show as I am, and as much as I don't think that it's that great, I still respect the hell out of it and every other lackluster sitcom out there, because for the week or two that it took me to watch it, it was kind of my happy show for a little while. It was something that I would throw on at the end of a long day and just know that I would get a wholesome adventure that would make me laugh and help me unwind for the night. Sam and Cat might not be the best show out there. It is incredibly flawed in numerous aspects, and it didn't quite live up to the potential that it definitely had. But despite that, I think it achieves what it set out to do. It tried to be a lighthearted show about two friends and their zany adventures, with its sole intent being to make you laugh. And honestly, that's just fine. I've been MattCMG. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. Check out my Patreon, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
I'm never that far, no matter where you are. Believe it, we can make it come true. We'll do it our way, no matter what they say, yeah. 'Cause no one's gonna do it for you, ooh, ooh, yeah. But I'll never say never, as long as we keep it together. If you live in a dream and you know what it means, then you can't let them change your mind. It's the life that we choose, and we still break the rules, but it's all gonna be just fine. Yeah, we're all gonna be just fine. You and me, we're gonna be just fine.
I'm gonna die. Fucking kill me. It's fucking hot in here.